Hello, everyone. Can everyone hear me? Okay, perfect. So this is the panel on the importance of innovation and technology in healthcare. My name is Salim. I work for the Public Relations and Communications Agency that's been the partner of choice for the Department of Health for, I think, 7 years or more. So we are the agency that's fortunate enough to support the Department of Health in telling all of the amazing stories that they have. And one of those amazing stories, or the series of stories that we've told, is how the Department of Health Abu Dhabi has been a leader in research and innovation. And so today I get to sit on a panel with a representative from the Department of Health and 3 other guests with us today who are also leading on research and innovation in their own ways. So I'll start from my left. So Dr. Derek Witcher is the Director of Health Sector Innovation at the Department of Health. Welcome.
Thank you.
And to his left is Augustine Amusu, who's the Chief Information Officer for MediClinic Middle East. Welcome.
Pleasure, thank you.
To his left is Mahmoud Wael, who's the Healthcare System Partner at Roche Pharma. Welcome.
Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Hamad Rashid, who has the same last name as me, but we're not related. He is the CTO for Dental ID, and he'll tell us a bit more about what that is. Welcome.
Thank you.
Perfect. So I'm going to start off, I guess it's a really great mix that we have today. We have someone who works as a regulator, we have a healthcare entity, we have a pharma company, and we have a startup on the cusp of becoming mainstream. And so what I want to hear from all of you guys, and we can start with Dr. Derek and then progress to the right, is what role do you see yourself playing in enabling innovation and technology in the health sector from a healthcare regulator perspective?
Yeah, I mean, you already mentioned enabling is the best word for us. So it's not about regulation, but it's really enabling innovation. And there are some roles. One, which we play with our team in Hub 71 in the middle of innovation, is a translation role. So sometimes we need to translate startup language to government language and the other way around, just to understand each other. But then it's also helping, enabling in terms of regulation. I mean, looking at healthcare, every investor, everybody is afraid of regulation since it's a highly regulated market. So the ability to create sandboxes, to test technologies, and to connect corporate companies like MediClinic and others to startups is probably one of the most important roles we have.
Thank you so much for that. Augustine, how about you from a kind of healthcare provider perspective? Where do you see the role of innovation?
Yeah, from a provider perspective, of course, we are in the hot seat, right? So I think first and foremost, the opportunities present themselves in areas of friction in industry overall. So I think we see our role as, first of all, articulating some of those points of friction. And as we articulate them, there in itself provides the opportunities for various innovation and ideas and startup opportunities themselves. So that's perhaps one. And of course, no doubt, we work with various regulatory entities in the various emirates that we work in. So using our organization as a review body for various medical technologies that come out, provide feedback, and in terms of its applicability within the healthcare environment. And of course, as a provider, you have a lot of data sets and clinical use cases of which technologies can help resolve. So we see ourselves as that environment where people can bring innovative ideas, technologies, and utilize the data sets that we have for particular purposes. So I would say those are perhaps a few ideas in terms of a provider's point of view.
Thank you so much. And you're absolutely correct, Augustine, especially I think for healthcare providers, you guys have such a wealth of information just because of the vast kind of pool of patients that you work with. So I'm sure there's a lot of insights that you can just gather from the patients that you see. So Mahmoud, in terms of pharma, where do you guys see your role in innovation?
I want to start by reflecting somehow on the COVID, because I think with COVID it came lots of learnings. We learned about the collaboration that the government should be having with the private sector, for example. And I think if without this collaboration, we wouldn't have been back to normal in our lives as well. And I think Abu Dhabi and the Department of Health specifically has facilitated this for the population in Abu Dhabi. But this hasn't started only from the COVID. This has started earlier on with a clear vision that the Abu Dhabi Department of Health is having towards healthier population. And this is not only translated into the infrastructure that the city is having, but rather into also the regulations and the policies that ensure equitable and sustainable access to innovation and to healthcare. If we talk about industry, and we're talking about Roche here, representing Roche, we have transformed the way that we look into business towards more personalized treatment and personalized healthcare, rather than one size fits all. We started to look into disease areas that weren't treated before, the clear unmet need that the patients are having. We started even to look into curative settings. So rather than looking only in treating a certain disorder, but rather curing this disease with gene therapies, for example. So looking at it again and connecting it back to the Department of Health, and Abu Dhabi is offering the fertile soil that would help such innovations to be early on tried and brought to the patients here in the Emirates.
That's amazing to hear, Mahmoud. Thank you so much for that. And you know, it's also amazing too, because a lot of times in other parts of the world, regulators usually, there's a lot of issue with bureaucratic red tape, and sometimes they're disablers of innovation. But clearly in Abu Dhabi, we have a system set in place where the regulator is actually an enabler of that innovation. And there's a lot of kind of maybe that entrepreneurial mindset here in government that you don't see in other parts of the world, which is quite incredible. And so that's great to hear from the pharma perspective. Last but not least, Hamad, from a kind of a startup on the cusp of becoming a non-startup, let's say, tell us about the role of innovation. I know that Dr. Derek mentioned, I think Hub 71, but there's a lot of other kind of players in that startup ecosystem. Can you tell us a bit more about innovation from your perspective?
Thank you. So, what I cannot talk about other startups basically, but what we try to do is that we make sure that innovation is impactful, and it's an actual problem that not only is needed to be solved, but we can solve it. You know, we have to care about it. We have to like the issue. And the impact, it doesn't have to be, the solution doesn't have to be incremental, it has to be significant. So as a startup, you know, like Mediclinic, you know, they can bring up incremental changes, but as a startup, we have to bring a bigger impact into the technology and innovation sector. We do that by making sure that we're using the latest technologies, you know, software, hardware, IoT, AI, you know, and cost-effective solutions, you know, that saves time for both the healthcare providers and the patients as well. And last but not the least, also it should be faster. You know, like what you mentioned earlier, that COVID brought the urgency to the equation. So everything had to be done faster. So I think the startups have to look at their solution that should, you know, save time, save cost, and, you know, bring the solution faster to market.
Can you tell us a bit more about Dental ID from kind of what's your concept and what are you offering?
So Dental ID is a software which helps healthcare providers identify age when age of the subject is unknown. So when it's unknown, you know, you have to do certain treatments in the hospital where biological age is needed. So our software provides, you know, a service for that. You know, we have an age assessment tool analysis tool and an AI assistive tool as well for the healthcare providers.
Okay, thank you so much, Hamad, for that. So, Dr. Derek, I'd like to bring the conversation back to you. So, we saw Hamad's example of this kind of creative startup coming into the market. So, what's the role of the Department of Health in attracting companies similar to Dental ID into the market when it comes to innovators or entrepreneurs who want to bring new ideas into the healthcare sector? Where do you guys see your role as the Department of Health Abu Dhabi?
I think mainly represents the entire sector. So there are some roles, for example, we had a big delegation going to the US in summer where we just as a Department of Health coordinated and tried to leverage what we have. So if you look at Abu Dhabi, for example, showcasing what we have, there is a hopefully agile, innovative regulator, but there's a close collaboration with Roche. There is Mediclinic, there is Cleveland Clinic, there is Mayo Clinic and others. I think our role is mainly, first of all, to coordinate and showcase what we have. And this is not just role of DOH, but we closely collaborate with Abu Dhabi Investment Office, for example, when it comes to financial incentives. We work with academia when people require access to researchers, to lab. I think our role is mainly to coordinate and showcase what we have. And that's what we do quite frequently, introduction meetings, calls with startups from abroad. We collaborate with all the commercial attaches and others from all the embassies around us in order to have our international channels. We have Abu Dhabi Investment Offices, foreign offices, so we really try to use all the channels we have in order to put Abu Dhabi on the map, and then on an individual company level talk to companies to attract them.
Okay, thank you for that, and thank you for that, Dr. Derek. So, and Augustine, from your perspective as a healthcare provider, how I don't know if you currently do this as Mediclinic Middle East, but do you guys work with startup incubators and accelerators? And if so, can you tell us a bit more about what those partnerships look like and some of the work that you're doing in that area?
Yeah, I mean, we've been plugged into various incubators, Hub 71, I believe as well in Abu Dhabi and also in Dubai, of course. Our role in this is we have a need and we can put our need out in the areas of interest, areas that we're trying to solve a particular solution. And they have the perhaps portfolio of various initiatives, various startups who might fit that need. And if there is a match, you know, how do we get together and collaborate in improving that technology specifically? I think some of the challenges out there overall is, you know, there's so much technology around and there's so much application of technology for various reasons. So at what point do you kind of filter out the noise and get to the perhaps avoid the creative destruction and kind of get to solutions that perhaps have a real value in society? So I think there's a bit of a noise that needs to be shaken out a little bit, but that's how we collaborate with the startup incubators to make sure that we can bring something useful to market.
Yeah, I really like that, Augustine, that concept of a disruption, and you're absolutely right. I think with a lot of innovation, you have that creative disruption at first, but then you need to kind of sometimes bring it back and actually build a structure around it, think of what the product is, think of, you know, what the system is. So there's kind of a disruptive side, and then there's also the side where you want to kind of, you know, take it to market, right? And Mahmoud, from your perspective too, when it comes to accelerating innovation, we know that pharma has been doing a lot of that, especially, you know, during the pandemic. We're already seeing that a lot of the technology and the innovation that was put forward to fight the pandemic is being used now for other purposes. We know that mRNA, for example, started out as, you know, for vaccine inoculation, and now we're seeing it as a potential tool for fighting cancer, for example. So when it comes to accelerating innovation, what are the challenges that you see in that area, and how do you, as a pharmaceutical sector, kind of overcome those challenges?
So when it comes to innovation and looking at the, can you hear me now? So when it comes to technology and innovation, I think it's a very broad term. And when it comes to even innovation in healthcare, it can start from wearables, for example, digital tools. It can also go through a disease that wasn't treated before. It can go towards a diagnostic tool that wasn't there before. So it's a very broad term. From my perspective, I think there are two buckets, I would say, that the challenges would fall into. The first one is how generations really differ in terms of digital literacy. Imagine how your kids are now very familiar using their phones, how at their age we didn't know even that there is something called a phone. So these generations are the generations that are coming, and we're expecting that this digital literacy to even prevail after some time. The second challenge from my point of view, but I think we're doing better, is how are we looking at the technology? Different perspectives. As Dr. Dirk said, the ecosystem is huge. To have an aligned understanding of what is the innovation, what is the technology, is a bit tough. And looking at the cost of the technology per se might be also somehow confusing. So the challenge is how can we look at beyond the pill rather than looking at the cost of the pill or cost of the surgery or cost of the diagnostic tool. How can we look at beyond that? Let's take, for example, a multiple sclerosis treatment. Are we looking at the treatment per se, or are we looking at the caregiver that's not accompanying the patient anymore, the productivity that's gained? So when we look at this, and this was a core in our collaboration with the Department of Health to establish a comprehensive pathway for assessing these new technologies in order to have this sustainable pathway for ensuring equitable access to such innovations to the population of Abu Dhabi.
Thank you so much for that, Mahmoud. So Hamad, you're looking at the three gentlemen here representing quite sizable sectors. You have the regulator, you have a healthcare provider, and you have the pharma sector. So as a representative of an entity that's somewhat smaller, that's trying to kind of innovate and create its mark on the market, how would you look to these sectors, all of them or some of them, to ask for help? What support do startups like yours need in order to succeed?
Well, every startup, in my opinion, needs the same things. They need access to funding, which Hub 71 and KIC, there's a lot of centers in Abu Dhabi have set up already. So we are already actually at the stage where access to funding is available. They need the ability to scale, the thing is that UAE as a market is actually, for maybe startups, is not as big. So they need more connections in the MENA region, that's what I would consider to be us in the same situation as well. And then, more like regulatory, from the regulatory perspective, it's a very sensitive area. So a bit more guidance, guidance in that section or that area would be helpful to startups, especially who are not aware about, the region or the traditions maybe as well. So guidance and mentorship as well, I would say. Yeah, so these are the things.
So Dr. Derek, those were a lot of points. From the regulator perspective, do you see eye to eye with what Hamad's mentioning, and what are the things that you've supported startups on when it comes to scaling, when it comes to funding? Can you tell us a bit more? I know you touched on Hub 71, but can you tell us a bit more about some of the other projects that the Department of Health Abu Dhabi is involved in?
Yes, of course. So, first of all, we are responsible for the entire emirate. So first it started somehow in Hub 71, but there are university incubators, there are healthcare providers who started to work more closely with startups, introduce some of them. So we are trying to enable everybody. So Hub 71 is by chance, it started all in ADGM, but it doesn't mean that's our scope, but there's a lot of other things to be done. The other aspect, and I somehow slightly disagree with in terms of access to funding. We still have a certain gap, and that's what we are working on. for early stages of startup who are not in the market and who have some kind of expensive proof of concept projects. And of course, if you come to life sciences, you need to involve patients, you need to do something like clinical trials. It becomes very easily quite expensive. It's too early for many VCs. At the same time, we don't really have comprehensive government funding. That's, for example, some of the things we try to work on, since government does not only mean you need to interact with each individual startup, but also about policy making, about creating funds, working with Department of Economic Development, Ma'an and others to make it happen. So there are a lot of projects, and we realized from this initial project working with startups in Hub 71, we need to have a much broader perspective in the long run. And also referring to your aspect of scaling, yes, I think that's something we also need to make sure, since, as you already highlighted, each startup needs to go beyond the UAE sooner or later, and that's something we also need to work on together with Ministry of Economy and others to really help you to access other markets, and partners like the two next to me on the left, Mediclinic, operating in more than just UAE and Roche everywhere in the world, could of course help to achieve this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Derek. Augustine, I want to come back to you. I think Hamad told us a bit about the challenges that startups face, and Mahmoud spoke about also maybe kind of some of the challenges and opportunities for pharma. When it comes to healthcare providers, can you talk about some of the challenges that you guys face when it comes to innovation, and maybe some solutions that you have in mind for some of these challenges as the Chief Information Officer for Mediclinic Middle East?
Sure, thank you. Thanks for the question. I think rather than from a particular provider perspective, I think I would rather talk from an industry perspective, because what affects one provider generally affects all the others. So I would say the most, not the most, but one of the burning, the big pains that needs to be solved is perhaps the revenue cycle ecosystem overall, how the providers talk to the payers, and how you interchange data, how you get approvals for procedures, how you check patients' eligibility, all of that kind of stuff. These are big frictions in the system overall, and if you're not careful, it leads to a lot of experience issues, both from the patient side, because speed to care is perhaps a little slowed down, and both from the administrative side, from the provider to the payer. And I think those are perhaps the more significant kind of fault lines in the system overall. Aside from RCM, I'll probably say maybe on the pharmaceutical side as well, again, the approval process for procedures and those sort of things, those affect all healthcare providers. And I think therein lies a solution that needs to be provided very quick to market to be able to perhaps fix some of these fault lines.
So Mahmoud, do you see that also, that those kind of challenges, do you agree from your perspective?
Yeah, and I believe as I was describing in the process of health technology assessment, it's health technology in general. It's not looking only at the products or pharmaceutical products or therapeutics. As Augustine mentioned, it's looking at the overall patient journey. So it can be a diagnostic tool, it can be a surgery. So how are we looking at that? I agree with Augustine. However, the DOH has taken very solid steps when it comes to establishing somehow a clear, comprehensive process to start to look at it that way, rather than looking at it service by service, but looking at it from an entire patient journey benefit.
So Augustine, you mentioned kind of the some of the challenges around the healthcare, between healthcare providers and payers, like in that relationship. I'm going to ask you a tough question, and it's fine if you say you don't have the solution yet. How do we expedite that process? Because I know it's quite, I would say maybe it's quite a complex system, and maybe there's been several solutions that have been tried and then cycled on, but do you see any solutions there to kind of expedite and maybe to improve those relationships and expedite that process so that patients, as you said, don't suffer?
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm pointing to a solution, but I think the industry has to come together, both the payers and the providers with the regulators' assistance to then perhaps try to solve this particular problem. Right now, it's payer-provider kind of more relationship, kind of assisted by the regulator on the side. But I think there is an opportunity for a tech play, essentially, with these entities to come together in the ecosystem and really solve this problem. Because without solving that, you add administrative burden to some of your clinicians. So they're dealing with a bit more admin things, whereas they can perhaps focus more on the patient, and there's a domino effect all the way down. So I wouldn't say I have the answer, but I think multiple players need to come together to try and solve this one particularly.
So, Augustine, as you were speaking, I'm seeing Dr. Derek vigorously nod his head. So you're kind of aligned with what Augustine had to say in terms of that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, Mahmoud already highlighted COVID helped industry and regulator to very closely come together. I think the same applies here. And so fully agree, we sit around one table. And the other thing I realize, payers are very much afraid of approving something, and then volumes will be increased endlessly. So I think one of the key things could also be to create controlled settings to approve innovation, but to limit it to a few providers, to specific patients, to whatever, since the biggest concern of payers is usually not the price of a new technology, but the fact that everybody, even though the patients may not really benefit from it, will be used. So that's one of the things that could also be agreed on in a setting like this. We make sure that there is no increase of volumes. At the same time, we as a payer pay for this technology to be used by Mediclinic or anybody else. So that's something, but again, it's only about collaboration. It doesn't work based on emails only.
That's right, and we've never shied away from being early adopters or being a test bed for these sort of solutions. So I guess anyone out there who has an idea when these entities come together, we're always willing to test.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, maybe those ideas will come through the Q&A session. I'm not sure if anyone in the audience has solutions to those very complex problems, but I think sometimes that's where innovation starts. It really starts in maybe expediting those processes. Innovation doesn't have to be maybe as disruptive as you say, Augustine. Sometimes maybe it's just going in and looking at ways we can kind of improve the system in those little ways. Mahmoud, I want to go back to you from a pharma perspective. How do you, from a regulatory perspective at least, how has your experience been with Roche when it comes to kind of maybe bringing new solutions or ideas into the market? I'm sure the pandemic expedited a lot of that for you guys. Where are the opportunities? Where are the challenges?
Okay. Thank you for this question. So I think one of the main opportunities is that we're living in a country where you can register your product few days after the FDA. And this is, honestly, this is somehow a luxury that we're having here in the country. So, of course, this, for us at Roche, this, of course, helps to bring the innovation as fast as possible, and we believe that this is an opportunity. And I would want to come back also on the aspect of how it can be reimbursed, how it can be assessed, how it can be looked at. And this is where our core of collaboration with the Department of Health comes. How can we look at this specific technology? Augustine highlighted how all the stakeholders should come together, and I believe this is the key word for anything to move forward, for innovation. The core concept is aligning on a common vision, and there is a very clear vision towards a healthier population. Everyone wants a healthier population. So when we look at this and having a common vision and building a comprehensive pathway and putting the patient at the forefront and looking at the population in general at the forefront, I think this is the biggest opportunity to ensure equitable and sustainable access to any medical advances. This is maybe from, I would say, the regulatory part. But I think also Dr. Dirk highlighted a lot about Hub 71 and the encouragement that's happening to the big entities or the big companies as well as the startups. So we're seeing Hub 71 encouraging startups, and this is what will boost innovation sustainability in the upcoming future. Maybe we don't have all the know-how, but some of these startups can help boosting these innovations.
That's great. Thank you so much. Hamad, we haven't heard from you in a bit. So I want to ask you, when it comes to research and innovation, kind of within, I know that you mentioned the startup ecosystem is quite diverse. do you have any examples in the Abu Dhabi market or UAE of some exciting startups that are emerging that you that have caught your eye? Can you tell us a bit more about those?
I think what Hub 71 is doing and what the other incubators are doing is great. Can you hear me? I can't. So I would say the startups in the artificial intelligence and machine learning sectors are doing really good, especially in the last 2 years when COVID hit and there was limited amounts of healthcare workers were there. So I see that there are some startups who are doing resource allocation using predictive data analytics. So these startups are actually really good. But then again, when they come in, they don't really know from the regulatory point of view how is AI machine learning being regulated and how the data is handled, in Abu Dhabi or in this region actually. Same thing for us as well. When we go to a healthcare provider, they don't. When they're dealing with the startup, they don't deal with us like, okay, you're a startup, you're going to bring an innovation. We are just vendors, basically. In the end of the day, we have to register with the providers as a vendor. We have to go through the proper processes, proper business registration and regulations. So, yeah, so there are some new technologies, that are coming up, and it's a very exciting time, but it's a challenge as well for all of us.
Thank you so much. So yeah, artificial intelligence, machine learning. On those 2 points, Dr. Derek, what are some of the partnerships or the projects that the Department of Health is engaging in those areas? If you can talk a bit more about those specifically.
Yeah, so first of all, in general, we have realized that artificial intelligence and all digital is something very special. So what we have created is really a digital team within DOH, really dealing with all those innovators, but also creating platforms, which is, I think, very important. So to believe as a regulator, everybody can deal with AI and digital, I think it doesn't make any sense. You really have to have a specialized team. And this also was a core of creating this digital center in Abu Dhabi for digital health. And then, of course, we have the data sources, Malafi and all of them. So for us, data is, of course, something that's very important for the future. And we really try to specialize. And yeah, I think that's the most important thing that regulators can do to develop knowledge and competencies in this field. Otherwise, I think you don't even understand what you're talking about if you don't have people who are really specialized in this field.
So, Augustine, from a healthcare provider perspective, and I don't know if you can speak specifically to Mediclinic or just healthcare providers in general, the adoption of AI and machine learning. Of course, we've seen it in a lot of diagnostic tools and other areas. What is something really exciting that you see happening in your kind of sector when it comes to AI and/or machine learning?
There are many exciting things. I think one challenge is, because there's a gap in the market does not necessarily mean there's a market in the gap, right? So you have to really be careful about that. So still a lot of noise out there. But for me, what excites me, especially around the role of symptom checkers especially where you have a large population and you're trying to get fairly early diagnosis, and the ones that are well certified as well, how they can perhaps help arrive at early diagnosis of a condition, and then you can then seek specialist approval or a specialist opinion after that. So that's, for me. In radiology, I think it's still split. Is it about the images and AI on the images, or is it about productivity of the clinician and helping guide what they do there particularly? And aside from that, the role of automation in general. I think the various mature products out there and how we can use that to create a lot of more efficiency with workforce in general. So for me, those are the areas I'm perhaps spend my time a bit more in and excited about, but I'm still very concerned that there are many solutions looking for problems. And how do we sieve between one and the other and start to hit around specific use cases? Yeah.
That's very interesting. Yeah, thank you so much. And Mahmoud, how about from your perspective, from the pharmaceutical sector? I mean, I think there's been a lot of very high-profile cases of how machine learning and AI have been used in the pharma sector. Is there anything specific to Roche that you can speak about?
Yeah, can you hear me? No? Yeah. So I think one of the things that Roche has also started to look into as part of our transformation is to look at these startups. How can they help also bringing some solutions? And we started to look, as Augustine mentioned, there are some solutions that can help shorten the time, that can help better productivity. Something regarding, for example, cancer patients, something for multiple sclerosis patients. Maybe we don't have all the know-how yet. However, we're started to scout for some startups that can help us and can help the patient ultimately to reach their goal. I agree with Augustine. We're a bit cautious. It's a new thing to us in pharma, so we're a bit still cautious, but we're learning on the go. And we're excited about the upcoming period when it comes to AI and machine learning, because we believe, as Dr. Dirk highlighted, from data perspective, how can this even have some predictive analytics to the future and population health? Definitely this can help the overall population. So we're cautious yet excited about this.
Yeah, and I understand that caution. I think with every technology, it's a double-edged sword, right? It's how you use it for what means. And I think those anxieties are well justified. And I think that's where the regulator plays a role in, creating the regulatory and the legal environment so that whether it's machine learning or AI, it's being done in an ethical and responsible way. And we've seen where, those innovations have gone wrong, and we've seen where those applications have been quite effective in, improving lives, improving healthcare. So I think absolutely there's anxieties, but there's also a lot of opportunities there. So I think we're almost up. We're almost up. I think we have a few more minutes. Maybe I'll give you, gentlemen, a chance to just say any final words on kind of the theme of today's panel, innovation. It could be your own personal perspectives, any predictions you might have for 2023 and beyond. Whatever it is that comes to mind, that would be great. I mean, we're at the beginning of the year, so predictions for the upcoming year would be also good if you guys have any of those. Hamad, we'll start with you.
I just want to kind of like ask regarding the regulatory point of view. So there's just one thing that startups, we've also faced this challenge that if one sector is too regulated and the goal is also innovation, so these are contradicting each other, right? So this is one of the concerns that most of my colleagues or friends in startup industry, startups, they face that, okay, how do we enter, this sector with innovation when there's so many limitations? So I guess this would be a question for us.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. I mean, yeah, definitely there's a tension point there for sure. Maybe there's a happy medium in between those two. I'm not sure if Dr. Derek has anything to say about that.
Yes, if you can allocate another hour, I will tell you everything. Let's make it very brief. I mean, it's a thin line between patient safety and innovation. So of course we are highly regulated, which is sometimes too much. I absolutely agree. At the same time, we always need to make sure, and everybody expects to be safe. I mean, Roche will never get approval for any kind of pharmaceutical product unless they really prove it's safe, nobody will be harmed, and it's effective. And that's our challenge as a regulator. I mean, it's easy. This one, if it doesn't work, the new one, and use it, fine, but there's only one surgery. So if it doesn't work, we have a problem. There is no second surgery you can just pick up. So that's a thin line for us. We try to enable very much, and there are many things we can do for sure. At the same time, this is really a thin line between patient safety and enabling innovation. And AI in particular, of course, if AI is a black box, we have a legal problem. If we don't really know what happens inside, and then there is some result, and we don't even know, every lawyer will ask, so you used it, but you don't understand what's happening inside this box. I mean, what you do is easier since it's not really about lives of patients initially, but in the end it's a really thin line, and we're learning all together, and that's why it's really great to sit next to all of you, since it makes only sense learning from each other. And if the regulator locks the door and sits inside and just thinking how the world could be, it will end up in a disaster or over-regulated system, which doesn't really help.
Yeah, so it's maybe a very kind of delicate balance. I think one of my favorite definitions of science is the art of uncertainty reduction. And I think a lot of times when we're talking about that tension point between innovation and regulation, it's really looking at how do we reduce the uncertainty of risks happening, right? And sometimes, I mean, Mahmoud, I'm sure you're used to this with pharma, but also in the healthcare sector, you really have to try something out a lot of times before it kind of goes to market. And so there's a lot of responsibility in ethics. So I think to your point, Hamad, it's about how do we do that and not stop, and not slow down that acceleration of innovation. And I think it's a very tricky balance sometimes. But it's a really important tension point to point to. So how about, Mahmoud, how about you? Anything that excites you about 2023? Any predictions you have?
Yeah, and I will take from what Dr. Dirk and Augustin mentioned earlier. I think it started last June when we had our workshop with the Department of Health, where all the stakeholders from the UAE were sitting in one room. And I think this was a great kickoff to a good collaboration across all the ecosystem and stakeholders. And I think this is a really exciting opportunity for us in 2023 to continue with the same momentum. Everyone sitting in the same room. We all have a common vision. But if we sit together and align together, maybe all the issues around the payers and all these stuff would be resolved in one time. So I think it's an exciting time. It's an opportunity that we can all capture. And we have started that already last year. So it's not a new thing to try. So this is what I'm aiming for in 2023, to continue and flourish this concept.
So collaboration is the name of the game. Yeah. Augustine, I think you're going to conclude this kind of round of last questions. Any final comments on?
Well, it's a boring conclusion because I don't predict, what the future would hold. But I'm excited by precision medicine particularly, and the role of ensuring that the medication ultimately, or things we prescribe for patients, are specific to them, specific to their conditions, and perhaps has the better chance of getting outcomes for that particular individual. So excited by it, but don't do predictions.
Honestly, I think that's not a boring conclusion. I think Dr. Derek would agree with me. It's one of the priorities for the Department of Health. There's been a lot of work and effort being put into precision medicine, and so Augustine, it's a great note to end our panel on. So I'm looking here towards the audience. I'm not sure if anyone has any questions from our panelists. Don't be shy. Okay, you guys were that good. You guys answered everyone's questions. That's it. There's no need for questions. Okay, thank you guys so much for joining the panel today, and thank you to our panelists. A round of applause. Thanks so much.
Thank you.